Hey, this is Yoshimoto doing a spotter up review of the Mantis X firearms training tool. I was first introduced to the Mantis X tool when I visited their booth at SHOT Show this year. I demoed the product, had a really good time playing with it, and seemed like a really valuable, pretty cool high-tech tool for firearms training. So I wanted to acquire one for T&E. In the box, the Mantis X tool comes with its own little Pelican case and the USB charging cable. The gadget itself is full of gyroscopes and accelerometers, so having the Pelican case to protect it is pretty nice. It also comes with an excellent instruction sheet. The instruction sheet comes with everything you need to know about the device. It tells you how to get started, including downloading free software. It also tells you about the programming algorithms that go into the dry fire training, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I can see how that would be a more difficult thing to program. Once you're ready to start training, you simply attach the device to any firearm rail. It can be any Picatinny rail. So as you see here, I have it attached to a Sig Sauer P226, which works fine, works on Glocks fine. I have it attached to an AR carbine here near the front end of the rifle. So once you're ready to start training, simply turn the device on, open up the app, and you'll be presented with this screen here. You will hit connect, and it will tell you to put the device down so that it can calibrate. Calibration usually just takes a second, and then you're presented with 4 options: train, history, learn, and settings. The settings screen is where you set up your training session. You can choose what kind of gun you want. You can get very specific about the make and model. You can choose which hand, dry or live fire, and where the device is mounted. Clicking the training tab opens up 3 separate screens and allows you to start shooting. So you press the start button and take your shots. It recommends you take an average of, say, 10 shots. This shows you your average score overall. It also shows you your score in real time as you're doing it. It shows you where your shots are breaking on the 360-degree wheel, and it gives you reasons that your shots may not be center. It also assigns you a score out of 100, which you can use as the simplest form of benchmark for your shooting ability. Sliding to the right shows you a second screen in the training section. This one shows you the deviation of movement during the trigger press and just prior to the trigger press while you're aiming. Represents it visually for you, and each dot on this is a shot out of 10 shots. Sliding to the right a third time shows you the movement just prior to trigger pull during aiming, which is the green, the movement during the trigger pull, which is the yellow, and then the red is the movement after the shot breaks. So this is a dry fire shot. The score is very close to 100. There's very little movement during trigger press or after the break. Clicking on the Learn tab, this wheel shows you basically the different directions in a 360 degrees circle that a shot can break away from center. Clicking on each one of these sections will give you pointers on why it's breaking that way and possibly how to correct it. Alright, the final tab is History, and it shows you all of the stats cumulatively for all of your previous training sessions. This is really cool if you want to examine your most common fundamental errors that you're making while shooting. It also has 2 screens and several filters, so you can filter out the history based on firearm, based on which hand you're using, based on live fire, dry fire, or CO2. So a very useful thing if you like going back and looking at the stats. So now I'm just going to walk through the setup process and take some shots real time. So the device is on. I hit connect on the app. The light stops blinking. It gives me a brief set this gun down to calibrate message. Takes a split second. So now I'm going to go and set up my training sessions. Shooting a pistol. I need to select Glock. Glock 19. Live fire, right-handed shooter. I hit the train button and hit start, and we're ready to go. So I'm going to run through a dot torture drill at 3 yards here. I'm only going to show you the first few shots. I just wanted you to see the app working in real time. For every shot that I take, the app will show you in real time how much movement there was just prior to the trigger press, during the trigger press, and of course after it breaks, which is the red line. So 3 yards, I shot it clean. Of course, I couldn't draw from holster with the Mantis device, so I was just picking it up from the bench for the sections that required a draw from holster. However, I wanted to shoot this at 5 yards, so I put 2-inch dot targets on the silhouette at 5 yards, and I went to work with those with the Mantis tool first. So here's my first 2-inch dot target at 5 yards. Yeah, the shots are all in the circle, but I'm not very happy with the group. Definitely could be tighter. For each circle, I took 10 shots. For my first score out of 10, my average was 92 out of 100, and it said I had too little trigger finger. So I said, okay, well, let me try and adjust that for my next 10 shots on the next target. Swipe into the next screen, you can see that none of my shots were real outliers. It was pretty consistent, but not a lot of great shots in there. And then the explanation for too little trigger finger is pretty self-explanatory. Score for my next 10 shots on average was pretty much the same score. You can see on the red marks there, I'm breaking shots down for the most part as opposed to up. It also says I have too much trigger finger now, so I'm overcompensating, and I'm doing something called thumbing, which I think is interesting. So the explanation for too much trigger finger is also very self-explanatory. Thumbing, however, means I'm pushing towards my strong side with my thumbs. And that's interesting when you look at where my shots were breaking on the target. So you can see I had some good shots, and then the last several were more poor than the rest. And if you look at my shots now, you can see I am in fact pushing more to the right. So now I have trigger finger placement and what my thumbs are doing to think about to try and improve the next group. My third group had a higher score. You can see the red marks that my shots were more consistently tighter to my point of aim. I don't have any finger placement or sort of grip related issues, but it does say I'm slapping the trigger now. So I've worked out some of the fundamental issues in my first groups, and now I just also need to incorporate some trigger control into the next group. So you look at the line at the top, you can see that my shots are all much more consistent, all at the average score or above it, except for the last one. And then when you look at the target, all the shots are tighter, they're all more centered, more precision. It looks like listening to what the app is telling me is actually helping to improve my shooting. So I just need to pull it together for this last group. So taking what I've learned and applying it to my last group, my score definitely was the highest it's been. 94.7. My shots are consistent around the center of the aiming point, and it says I'm breaking my wrists up. But the Mantis X isn't detecting any of the problems that plagued my previous groups, which is good. Here's the explanation for breaking wrist up. Basically it means that your shots are going high because your wrist relaxes. My shots are pretty consistent except for the last 2 shots, but they're all fairly high accurate shots. And if you look at the group, it's very tight. It's all pretty consistent precision wise, but all my shots are in fact going a little bit high of center, which would make sense if I guess I was breaking my wrist up. So taking everything I learned from doing the dot drills with the Mantis X device, I removed the device and I shot the dot torture drill at 5 yards from the holster. I almost cleaned it. I missed one shot with my weak hand, of course. And I have to say that going through the drills with the Mantis device really showed me where my fundamentals were sort of lacking and allowed me to pull out this 49 out of 50 at 5 yards. So I have to say the device worked as advertised, and I'm pretty happy with it. While most of the training I did with the Mantis X involved handguns, I did also put the tool onto my competition AR just to see what kind of advice it would give me. Here in the settings screen, you can see that the current firearm says Aero Precision with a Hyperfire ECL. It's an AR in 223. So you're able to input your own personal firearms and customize the name any way you want so that you can record the data and go back and see exactly which firearm you're using later. One thing I learned is that shooting offhand with an AR is not my strong suit. So definitely benefit from using this tool to try and improve that. And for rifles, the Mantis X tool has an entirely different set of training tips for why you're seeing the deviation in accuracy and errors in your fundamentals. So going forward, I definitely would like to incorporate the Mantis X tool into my rifle training as well. I can see a huge benefit from it. So my final impression of the Mantis X training tool is overwhelmingly positive. I think it is at least as good, but likely better than the other training devices out there, such as the laser training cartridges you can drop in a chamber, or even the SIRT pistols. Not to mention there's the cost issue with this being much less of a cost than a SIRT system. The only downside of this system is that it's you have to custom make a holster to accommodate the device. Aside from that, I would really like to run this through an extended course of fire where there's movement and reloads, and see what kind of data we get from long strings of fire like that when you're thinking about other things. I think that would be a huge benefit. So overall, the ability to get the detailed feedback, have it recorded digitally and stored, and be able to really use that as benchmarks and metrics. I think it's a great benefit. Also, the benefit of using this tool for new shooters, somebody either a first time shooter or just beginners, I think the potential is obvious. The tool can show new shooters exactly what they might be doing wrong and help them correct them and create good fundamentals right from the start. So that's all I got. Thanks for watching. This is Yoshimoto signing off.